Hi everyone, good afternoon. This is Sean McDonald with Evisions. We'll go ahead and get today's Argos webinar kicked off. Joining me from Oakland University today is Nick Jakubiak, who's an IT specialist within the graduate school. And Nick's going to be doing most of the presenting today, since that's why everyone's here, if I had to guess. And so today's webinar obviously is going to be focused on Argos, but in particular, we're going to take a look at how Oakland University is able to join PostgreSQL and Oracle data within their Argos dashboards. And so that's going to be the main focus on the webinar today for everyone. And just a few quick housekeeping items. We're going to do a quick little refresher course of Evisions and Argos, although I do believe most of you are current Argos clients. We will then kick things over to Nick, and we'll take a look at the case study in the webinar presentation. And then at the end, there will be an interactive poll. So if any of you want additional, I guess you would say additional information, or if you have any questions from the webinar or Argos in general, that would be the opportunity to submit the request. The appropriate person from Evisions will then be following up with you. And then last but not least, we will also have an interactive Q&A session at the end. So there will be a little chat box. I think you should be able to see that. That would be the time to type in the questions, and then either myself or Nick will handle those at the end of the webinar today. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, probably this will come as no surprise to anybody, those of you who are using Argos and current Evisions customers, but a little background. We're actually celebrating our 21st year in business. And in that time, all we've done is work with higher ed institutions. And so that's definitely something we're proud of. We do a lot of these ongoing case studies and webinar presentations from current clients. And so that kind of ties into play with what we're going to be talking about today. In that time, we've worked with over 950 higher ed institutions, 958 to be exact. And based on the conversations that we've had with clients, that's led to roughly an 80% reduction on average in terms of time spent delivering and creating reports. And I think some of that will tie in to the presentation today. So just keep that in mind as we go through the webinar. Real quick, I think a few of you, this will probably be new to, especially if you're just now learning about Argos. So I want to very quickly do a refresher in terms of the building blocks or the foundation of Argos. You will probably hear the term today, data block. So what is a data block within Argos? I like to describe it as a view with parameters, or put another way, it's in essence where all of your SQL queries for all of your data is being pulled. And within Argos, we have a few different use types or user levels. I won't go into too much detail here, but if you're more of the IT persona, you would probably take the role of a data block designer, doing that behind the scenes SQL work to stand up these data blocks. If I'm more of a functional expert within a given field, I would probably take on the report writer role. And then last but not least is basically the consumer of all of the reports, the dashboards, running your data, and that's what we call report reviewer. So I just very quickly wanted to mention that. And obviously, in terms of use cases, all types of users have the ability to run reports, export their data, so on and so forth. So with that said, since everyone is here to actually hear from Oakland University today, I'm going to kick things over to you, Nick, and let you take it away.
Thanks, Sean. Let me share my screen here. Let's start.
Yep,
All right,
we can see it. Perfect.
Looks good?
Yep.
Cool. Thanks, Sean, for the introduction. Today, as you said, we'll be talking about joining Postgres and Oracle data in your Argos dashboard. A little bit about me. I've been working with Argos for probably 2 years now, maybe 3. I work as an IT specialist for the graduate school at Oakland University. Here at Oakland, we use Banner as our student information system. Banner uses Oracle as their backend database, and we are an on-premise Banner school, which means we're not a cloud school. What are we using Argos for? Pretty much all of Argos's features we try to take advantage of, including dashboards, creating different audits for different data. We have a lot of weekly reports that go out, a lot of process improvements. The screenshot on the right is just some examples of some of our reports, and that doesn't even scratch the surface. So we use Argos a lot here at Oakland University. So the problem we're going to be talking about today is a problem that has to do with the limitations as far as joining together multiple databases within Argos. So many departments have data stored in Microsoft Access, CSV files, etc. that need to be used in Argos. Our current Oracle license limitations prevent us from creating custom tables within Banner to store data. So that would be the easiest solution, is just to create more tables in Oracle. That way we can join together data there, but the Oracle Banner license has a lot of restrictions. So our IT department introduced Postgres as a way for departments to store their data, but the need was still to join the Oracle data within Argos to the Postgres data. There are a lot of inefficient workarounds that were initially discovered, but none of them were a great solution. And that screenshot is showing when you create a new query in Argos, you have to select the data source, and you only can select one. So you can select Oracle, Postgres, or other things, but you only can select one at a time. So the solution that I kind of came up with is to utilize memo boxes. So memo boxes can store delimited text, and then what we're going to do with that is parse it into a virtual table. So I found out that memo boxes don't really have a limit on the amount of data that can be stored in it. Or at least I didn't really run into one, which I was kind of surprised, but that was a pleasant surprise. Memo boxes can be set to data aware, or users can actually paste data from like a CSV file straight into a memo box. So how it works is we use an Oracle query from Banner to create a comma delimited string of data. We store the string of data in the memo box. We use Postgres to parse out that memo box data into fields and rows that kind of constructs almost a virtual table within Postgres. Then you can join that virtual table containing your Oracle data to your Postgres data in the Postgres query. Now, instead of using an Oracle query to grab data from Banner, you could just paste in CSV data into the memo box. So that screenshot below kind of shows you have your Oracle data on the left. That data is then turned into a string that's stored in the memo box, or you could use a CSV file that just gets pasted in. And then Postgres is on the right, turning that data back into a table using a whole different connection. So now we're going to kind of go through an example of this in use. So let's say we have a list of program managers stored in Postgres. So that is a screenshot down here on the right, just the person's name, last name, email, the major and degree codes associated with them, and then some other information. So this is in Postgres, not in Banner. And what we want to do is find the number of applications for each of their programs belonging to the managers. And we want to join it together on the major code and the degree code. So our application data is stored in Banner, aka Oracle, and we cannot traditionally join the data because they're in two separate connections. So our Oracle data is down here, simply displaying degree code, major code, and the number of apps from Banner. So our first step is to turn that Oracle data into a comma delimited string and store it in the memo box. So this code down the left kind of shows what that looks like. So each column, and then you concatenate it with a comma, column, comma, column, and then it turns it into data that looks like this on the right. So we're actually going to do this in a SQL variable, and then set the memo box to data aware. So in Argos, you can change the properties of the memo box. Instead of having it free text, you can have it point to a SQL variable. So we're going to point it to the SQL variable we created down on the left. So now that we have our Oracle data in the memo box, we need to parse it. So now Argos syncs, all you have is a memo box full of just a string of data. So what we're going to do is we're going to utilize some Postgres string parsing functions, such as split part. So the first step down here is we're going to split the line of code for each row. So the character 10 string to array function, this splits each line of this memo box down here into one row. But now that we have it in one row, we need to separate the columns as well. So the split part function takes the p dot lines and then splits it for each instance of the comma in two separate columns. So we have a degree column, major column, and then the app count column. So when we run this code, the data is reconstructed back into another table, but this is in Postgres now, not Oracle. So now we can use this data in Postgres. And the last step is to join the data. So we have our code down here that we just saw in the last step, which splits up the memo box data. We are going to join it on the coordinator table, which belongs in Postgres. We're joining it on the major code and the degree code down here. And once you do that, then you have your result down here, which is for each program manager and their program, you have the app count. So me, my MS 5160 program, here's my 201 app count. So this is the magic right here, where you have your virtual table reading the memo box. As you can see, the Oracle memo box down here. It's reading that, parsing it, interjoining it with the coordinator table, joining it on the major code and the degree code into one table in Postgres. So now we have our Oracle data and our Postgres data joined together using Postgres. All right, some of the limitations. So memo boxes can store a relatively unlimited amount of data, as we discussed earlier. When parsing a memo box, the data is treated as a string. So when your database looks at the memo box, all it sees is one long string. It doesn't see the line indentations or anything. It just sees one long string. So the good thing about Postgres, at least what I discovered, is it can accept a string of any character length. So with Oracle, I try to do it the reverse. So I try to do it where we're joining together Postgres data in an Oracle query, but I discovered that Oracle can only accept a string of 4,000 characters by default. When I went over 4,000 characters, Argos threw an error that the Oracle database had an error. Apparently there is some ways around this by adjusting your underlying Banner database, but I didn't want to get my IT department involved in that. Therefore, we prefer to use the Postgres to join Oracle data rather than the other way around, just because there's no limitations. All right, so use cases. So this method can be used for many different use cases. As shown in our example, we can join together data from two different databases. Another feature that we use this a lot for is inserting data from one database into another. So instead of joining that virtual table, as we did back over here, we can actually insert data into Postgres. So we can take data from Oracle, put it in a memo box, read that memo box in Postgres, and then insert the data into Postgres. So the reason we might want to do that is to speed up load times. So I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but when you're looking or working with very complex interactive dashboards, sometimes the data takes a long time to refresh after you change parameters. So let's say I switch my dashboard to look at undergraduate instead of graduate students. Sometimes it could take up to a minute or two, even 5 minutes to refresh the entire dashboard. And that's not very nice when we're having deans and executives look at the dashboard. So what we did instead is take all of our data from the dashboard, aggregate it up and insert it into Postgres, and then run the dashboard off Postgres. That way, the data is already pre-aggregated, so the dashboard runs instantly instead of having to recalculate everything every time a filter is changed on the dashboard. So that was a really helpful thing that really sped up some of our dashboards. Another big use we use this method for is a user can paste comma delimited data from a CSV file into a memo box. It can be parsed, joined, or inserted, etc. So instead of the memo box being data aware to that Oracle variable, the memo box is just a free text field, and then text can be pasted into it. So this could be used to load old data stored in old Access files or Excel files into Postgres. This screenshot shows what that might look like. So I could open an Excel CSV file in like Notepad or something, copy it, just paste it into here, and then click insert. And I think I show how that works here. Yeah, so inserting data using Argos. So a SQL variable can be created to insert data from a memo box into your database. So you actually can do some really cool stuff with this. You can create a simple like create, read, update, delete application using Argos. So you can have buttons deleting data from your database, creating data, updating data, reading data. So this screenshot just shows an example of what it would look like if you wanted to insert data from a memo box into your database. So down here, we're doing the same magic where we split the lines up based on the line feed character, and then we're splitting up the columns into individual columns. So in this example, we're taking a memo box that has people's names, emails, their role, and the program they belong to. We want to insert it into our program manager table that lives in Postgres. So we're just going to use a simple insert statement from Postgres. Insert it, we choose our columns, we choose our table, and then we're selecting star from our magic code here, which splits up all the data. And then the code only runs when the insert button is pressed. So we have an insert button here. The code only runs when that button is not null, aka when it is pressed. So this is pretty useful. If you ever wanted to create, you can create like whole different applications and anything. If you have a Postgres database or any type of database, you can insert data using this method, and it's become pretty useful for us. So uses with different databases. So theoretically, this method could be used with any 2+ databases connected to Argos. We only have Postgres and Oracle here at Oakland, but let's say you have a Microsoft SQL server or maybe an AWS instance of something, I don't know, connected to Argos. This method could be used to join together all of those databases, since there's not really a way to do that right now. Each database software, whether it's Oracle, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, whatever, has their own parsing functions to parse strings. So we use the split part function and the unnest split to array function within Postgres, but for example, Oracle has their own version of this, Microsoft SQL has their own version of this, so the method is still the same, excuse me, but you have to still look up the relative functions related to your database you're trying to use, but the actual methodology that we're using in this presentation is still the same. Therefore, our method is not limited, like we said. There may be other limitations though with other databases. Like I said before, Oracle can only read a 4,000 length string. So something like this would work with Oracle because it's probably only a couple hundred characters, but if you had thousands and thousands of characters or rows, it might not work with your database. You'll kind of just have to do trial and error on that. Conclusion. So this solution kind of addresses a problem that many data block designers at OU have asked, which is joining together 2 different databases, aka Postgres and Oracle for us at Oakland. We also unlock the ability to insert data, update data, and delete data using Argos. And me and all my colleagues here at Oakland are always looking for more ways to use Argos. So I think that's pretty much it.
Great, thanks. So we'll go ahead and put up the interactive poll. If anyone wants additional information about this, that would be the opportunity to do so. And while that poll is up, I will start fielding questions for you, Nick. So let's see here. First question is, once you've figured out the process initially, how long does it take on average to go through this process?
Once you figure out once you kind of understand and learn how it works, it doesn't take you long. You just got to do a little bit of trial and error. You'll have to customize it based on your own code. So let's say you have, like for this one, I don't know if you can see my screen right now, but the more columns you have in your table, the more complicated it'll be. If you only have a couple of columns, it'll be pretty straightforward. But I would say if you're using data blocks a lot, using SQL a lot, it shouldn't take you more than a week or two to implement this methodology.
Thanks. And one other thing off the topic I wanted to mention, I did not mention this at the beginning, a recording of this webinar will be sent out to everyone, I believe, within about 48 hours. So look for that in your email inbox as well. So if anyone wants to go back and review today's webinar, you'll get access to that. Another question, you used admissions reports as your example. What other reports are you guys using for this, or what other reports are you able to make use out of on campus?
Well, like my other example was the one where we have an admissions dashboard and we insert banner data that's pre-aggregated into Postgres. That way the dashboard can read off of Postgres and the load times are a lot quicker. That was actually a really big thing for us because our dashboards were taking 5 minutes to load every time you change the filter on them. But ever since we inserted data into Postgres and ran it off that's pre-aggregated, the load times were cut down to only a few seconds. So that's another function you can use it for. Another thing is we're storing old data, not really data, but just anything like our list of program managers or things that can't really be stored in Banner. We created tables for within Postgres, used our insert function to just simply take these old things from like Access or Microsoft Excel CSV files and then just insert them into Postgres to use it there instead. So it's kind of limitless what you want to use this for. Yeah.
Another question, is the memo box populated using an automatic job, or is it manually uploaded from the CSV file?
So it could be both. So the memo box could be a free text field where I go into Excel, take my CSV file and just paste it in there and then click a button and it does something. Or you can set the memo box to data where it looks at a SQL variable and pulls the data from there instead. So we use it for both here at Oakland. And if you start using this method, I'm sure you'll be using it for both as well. So you kind of have your options with that. You can use paste it in, or you can use it pointed to a variable.
This is a more general question, but I'll defer to you, Nick. You can probably answer this better than I can. But generally speaking, can you give a little summary or detail in terms of what actually PostgreSQL is? I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, so Postgres is just another database that we have that our IT department hosts on our servers. The reason we need it is because we can't really store custom data within our Banner database because of license restrictions. So Postgres allows the IT department to give departments their own database where they can kind of do whatever they want with it. So we kind of have our own sandbox with, and our IT department doesn't really have to worry about us screwing up Banner because we're working in a whole separate database. So you don't have to use Postgres. You could be using Microsoft SQL or AWS or anything else, but Postgres is just a database software that we happen to be using at OU.
And that actually was a question just submitted in terms of why you guys selected it. So it sounds like it just was what OU was already using and what was available, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, it was just what our IT department selected. I believe, don't quote me on this, I think it's a free software. So if you need extra databases on your campus, maybe your IT department can look into Postgres or something that they can host themselves and then connect Argos to it to kind of just store data that doesn't really belong in Banner.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, Nick, but someone was asking, is this code being shared on our online user co-op or forum? Do you know if you guys are sharing this at all or plan to?
I don't think we have this on the co-op anywhere. But I think everything within the PowerPoint, all the code screenshots at least, will be sufficient enough to get anyone going on this. I kind of presented this to our internal staff here at OU. I know a couple of people are starting to use it, and kind of once you figure out the method and see the code, you're kind of off on your own, and it should be pretty straightforward from there.
Another question, someone's asking, is this only able to be used within dashboards, or do you currently, or do you know if you would be able to use it to generate output reports as well?
No, we actually use this for reports as well. So for our admissions report example, we wanted to join together a list of people to send it to, aka the program coordinators, and that data is stored in Postgres. And then all of our admissions data is stored in Banner. So we join them together using this method, and then generate a PDF report that goes out to over 100 people every Wednesday, and it works really well for that.
Did you guys have any, or are there any maintenance issues that should be considered regarding the data warehouse within the non-Banner database?
I'm not
That you're
really
aware of?
I'm not really in our IT department, so I'm not sure. I haven't really heard of anything. I think the only limitation could be storage, but this type of data doesn't really take more than a few gigs of data, so that's not really an issue. But no, there's never really been any like Argos crashes or errors using this method. I kind of figured that Argos couldn't handle, like I tried this with like 700,000 rows of data stored in a memo box, and Argos was fine. It ran fine. So I was kind of surprised by that. But yeah, I've had no issues really using this method.
Does Oakland, do you guys have an ODS, or are you guys relying solely on Banner and Postgres?
We don't have one as of now. I believe we're looking into one. This could, I guess Postgres could be used as a little data warehouse, but it's not ideal. So we're kind of just making ends meet right now, but we do not have an ODS right now.
Another person is asking if they can create a memo box on the dashboard and then allow users to paste data from Excel or a CSV file. And second part to that question is, can they use the fields in the memo fields in their reports?
Yeah, so we do that. You can paste data in and then run a report off of it. Because once the data is in the memo box, the code just turns it into a virtual table, which can be used in your in anything, your report query and variables, anything. So once the data is in there and Postgres or Oracle parses out the data back into a virtual table, it's just like a normal SQL table. So you can do whatever you want. You can do with statements, you can do where clauses, group bys, pretty much anything. So one example is, let's say you want to paste in a list of student numbers from Excel and then run a report for all those students, you can do that.
Another kind of a follow-up question to that regarding MemoBox. Do you know, is that an open source product? And if so, or even if it's not, how did you guys go about getting it? Or do you know the answer to that, Nick?
Is what an open source?
MemoBox?
Memo boxes are just a type of field on Argos on your dashboards when you're creating a dashboard. It's just like a text field or a drop down or anything. It's just a type of field on there.
This is more of a general question. Someone's asking if Argos could potentially be a tool that would replace the need for access. And generally speaking, yes. I mean, I've worked with a number of schools that have come off of access for reporting. So generally speaking, yes, that is a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, in the graduate school at least, we pretty much never use access anymore. I would say like 3 years ago, everyone in the office was using access almost on a daily basis, and it was a huge mess just because you run into like 10 different copies of the same database. Access tends to be slow, and it was just a whole mess. So we've transitioned pretty much 100% to Argos now, which is nice.
I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, Nick, but someone had asked the question, what is the difference between the method that you described versus using variables in Argos connected to another database link?
So the variables, that was one of the workarounds that we tried at first. The main thing about the variables is you can't have, at least I don't think you can have multiple columns within the variable that in multiple rows. So if you want multiple rows, I think you can only have one column, and it's kind of harder to join together a variable to another database. So this method was a lot more useful. Plus, with a variable, you can't really do the whole pasting in data type of thing. So variables work for some things if you're just trying to do a simple application where you pull like a list of keys from Banner and then join it. But I found this method to be more friendly.
Someone's asking, they'd like to get your thoughts in terms of why not just look at importing I assume that's CSV data into Oracle database by using SQL load. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, we were looking at that, like adding custom tables to Oracle, but the issue is, I don't know if a lot of other schools have an issue like this, but Banner, the license for Banner doesn't allow, I guess, custom tables in Oracle, so you can't just create a custom table in Oracle and insert data into it. We're kind of locked down in that aspect. That's the main reason we had to implement Postgres and use this method.
Do you have any insight in terms of how security is handled? I guess speaking directly to this case studying process, I don't know if you have any insight on that you might be able to add.
I mean, Postgres they're hosted by our IT team, so I hope they're doing a good job with security there. So I don't really think there's any issues on that end. Yeah, everything's on premise. So Banner and our Postgres data are both hosted by our servers on campus.
Sure. Multi-column list box. So can a multi-column list box be used as a source for the memo box?
No, but what we can do is instead of making a multi-column, just throw that data in a SQL variable and then point the memo box to that SQL variable. And then it'll show up in there. So in the screenshots, I use multi-columns just to make it more visual, but you actually want the data inside of a SQL variable, as I showed in one of the screenshots. That way you can point the memo box to it.
Connection question. So one of the attendees was asking for some more information in terms of how you get the Oracle connection or how you select the Oracle connection for Oracle SQL and Postgres connection for your Argos DataBlock. So put it another way, could you maybe explain a little more how the connections were selected, especially for your Oracle SQL variable?
Yeah, so when you create a new data block, at the very top, it gives you an option to select the connection you want to use. So that'd be your main connection. So let's say our main connection is Oracle. But then when we create a multi-column or a SQL variable, there's a little line of text when you create one that at the bottom that says choose a different connection for this object. That's where you would select the other connection. So if your main connection is Oracle, when you create a multi-column at the bottom, there's a little line you can click to change that, just that multi-column to Postgres.
Let's see if we get any other questions here. A lot of questions. This is good stuff. Any other questions? I think we've gone through all of them so far. Let's see if, give it another minute, see if any more come in.
And my email is on the screen if anyone wants to email me just for some follow-up questions or more technical questions. I'm happy to help with anything.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for that, Nick. And just as a quick reminder, a copy of this will be going out to everyone if you need to rewatch this or review it as well. Okay, another question. How long did this take you guys to implement? Do you know what the timeline was?
I mean, I had to discover the method, and that took a while. But once I discovered it, we kind of went crazy and implemented it in a couple of our data blocks. So once you discover it, it only takes maybe a few weeks of just casually working on it to get it up and running. Yeah.
Have you guys used APIs for connecting to your Postgres?
APIs? No, we have not. I haven't really explored APIs yet too much.
I have an output question. Can Argos output to Excel? Yes, that is one of the file formats that are supported. Generally speaking, I don't know, Nick, if you guys do any specific outputs within Excel.
Yeah, we do multiple. We have a couple of reports that spit out CSV files to someone's email, just for data for them to review. We mainly use PDFs, though, I would say.
Yeah, more of the formal, I guess, banded reports. That seems to be pretty common. Let's look for any other questions. Okay, I think that might be the end of it. If there are other questions, though, thanks for volunteering, Nick, in terms of your email address.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, well, I think we will go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks for doing this. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate having me on here to present.
Yeah,
Sean.
absolutely. You guys have done some really neat case studies at Oakland, so I'm sure we'll be in touch with you at some point in the near future. So thanks again, Nick. We'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Thanks everyone for attending today.
Yep, thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.